What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about the history of England. Now, whether this is surprising or not, the average American really doesn't know anything about England, let alone the history of England. I think when Americans think about England, they immediately think of London, they think of the Queen, they think of Big Ben, and honestly, that's probably about it. Uh, we have a way of really boiling things down to their most fundamental components, right? But no, I have been learning a bit more. If you're watching this video, this is the first video you've ever seen of me in your life. I've actually been learning about the UK. I've been learning about Great Britain. I just watched a whole video on the history of the British Empire, but I need to go deeper. We need to go deeper. We need, we have, I realized at the beginning of that one that England had already been established. So this video is about the history of England summarized, as this video title claims. So that actually sounds about perfect for me. I know we're not going to be able to hit on every detail of England's probably very complex history, but this is going to be a fantastic way to for me to really dip my toes into a history of a country I really don't know anything about. I'm embarrassed to admit, but I'm here to rectify that today. So, with that being said,
names are hard, especially when it comes to the British Isles. The island of Britain is home to England, Scotland, and Wales, while the island of Ireland is composed of the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom's Northern Ireland.
This is actually a nuance here that I only very recently learned, that Americans don't know at all. Americans would just consider the UK, Britain, and England to be the same place. We use those words interchangeably, honestly. Now that I know better, for lack of a better word, that actually seems quite silly to me, but I get it. It's just a weird American cultural thing where those terms are never really explained from a very young age. We just refer to this place over there called the United Kingdom, or it's Britain, or it's England. It's all the same, you know, no big deal. It's all the same, right?
The island of Ireland is composed of the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom's Northern Ireland.
And that Ireland is composed of two distinct parts? Never knew that. That's kind of actually wild. But I'm sure there's a million things like that I could just get lost in forever, learning fact over fact. That actually wouldn't be too bad of a way to go, would it? Just death by facts about the British Isles until you drift away. Okay. Okay, I gotta reel it in a little.
This is not only a nightmare to keep track of, but as we've seen, this is all subject to change, probably a little sooner than we think. I say all this to clarify what we're actually going to be talking about in this.
What does he mean, subject to change? Is the composition of Great Britain going to change? Is someone gonna leave? What are we talking about here? When was this made? When was this video made? 2020, 2 years ago. I think everything's relatively the same, but I guess I don't know for sure. I don't know. Kind of makes me wonder.
This video. England. Now, not only is England not Britain, but its history is plenty interesting all its own. So, to see how England grew from a simple Roman province to the master of Britain and a major world power, let's do some history.
That was one of the amazing things I've learned. How much of a world power, a worldwide influence Great Britain had and has still. But my God, that empire. Unbelievable. And did he actually say England started with Romans? Which I certainly did not know.
Grew from a simple Roman province to
a simple Roman province, wow.
Master of Britain and a major world power? Let's do some history. Our earliest documentation for England comes with the arrival of Julius Cheekbones Caesar, who crossed over from Gaul in 55 BC. The native Celts were none too pleased with their new neighbors, so Rome kind of stalled for a century until Emperor Claudius established the province of Britannia.
Julius Caesar came over? I mean, these are historical figures even someone as dense as me know about. I did not know that we were talking about Roman history had such a deep ties to English history. That's pretty fascinating.
Roman influence on the island was rather for a century until Emperor Claudius established the province of Britannia. Roman influence on the island was rather
Okay.
slim outside of the main port cities. Since it was hard enough to schlep all those armies across the channel, they were happy to delegate certain responsibilities to the local kings. In 60 AD, one
Okay.
such client king bequeathed half of his lands to Rome.
I was gonna say, who were the original inhabitants of England? If we have Romans kind of coming over, sailing over, and establishing some of their own parts, who was living there already? I'd be interested to know.
To the local kings. In 60 AD,
The local kings, whatever that means exactly. What does that mean? Elaborate!
one such client king bequeathed half of his lands to Rome, but when the empire glomped all of it anyway, the late king's wife Boudica led a rebellion that burned through several eastern cities, including Londinium, before she was
Wow.
defeated in battle. Later,
Wow.
Romans expanded outwards to the edge of Caledonia before Hadrian said nope and built a wall across the island to stop any hotshot general from getting ideas.
Okay. So we have the Romans kind of trying to take over what would be England and getting stopped as it goes further north, which I believe is modern day Scotland, right? This is getting quite interesting.
The benefit of Britannia's insulation was that it didn't see much disruption from the carousel of imperial civil wars, but the downside was that Britannia was the first province to be cut loose when the barbarians started rolling up in the 400s. The next several centuries
This is a lot. Now we got barbarians. I'm trying to follow this. This is a lot of information. We got Romans trying to go north, blocked by a wall. And now we have barbarians. Okay.
was the first province to be cut loose when the barbarians started rolling up in the 400s. The next
Okay.
several centuries are marked by a constant shuffling between small Romano-Britannic kingdoms and a tidal wave of northern European newcomers. The polite term for this
Okay.
is disorganized, and the accurate term for this is gross. The early medieval
Okay.
period saw raids and migrations from Picts, Angles, Jutes, and Saxons, and while the map doesn't stop fidgeting with its borders anytime soon, the players get a little clearer by the late 600s.
You know, what's very fascinating about the British Isles and England is its history is very largely dictated, now that I think about it, by the fact that it is an island. I mean, if you zoom out far enough, the North America is an island. But the landmass is so huge, it's like, I don't think of North America as an island. I don't think anyone does. Whereas the United Kingdom and Ireland, the British Isles, is like this entity I have no concept of relating to. Just existing on these islands where everyone kind of lives very relatively close together. There's only so much land mass. It would really, and people have to sail to you to reach you. It's really a whole different way of even thinking about how that would impact your nation's history. It's honestly fascinating.
Here we can see 7 major Anglisk and Saxon kingdoms of Northumbria, Kent, East Anglia, Mercia, Essex, Sussex, and Wessex.
So now we have Anglo-Saxons. This is like hundreds of years have passed. And we have Anglo-Saxons coming and establishing lots of kingdoms, actually.
Those last 3 being East, South, and West Saxony, in case you were wondering why England sexed up so many of its place names. These kingdoms weren't entirely Britannic nor fully Germanic. Just like the Romans, it was a case of gradual integration between lots of small and unique groups of people.
Okay, that's fascinating. Now I'm just interested, how is this going to transition to modern day England? And who are they the descendants of? Are they the descendants of all this mixture of cultures that was all kind of shuffling around for control of the island? Or what?
Sometimes friendly, sometimes stabby. For a dash of literary context, the legendary character of King Arthur is set specifically against the backdrop of these Germanic migrations.
Oh, cool. Yeah, King Arthur. It's like, why are we taught nothing about English history in American education? Yet every American knows the story of King Arthur and his knights. Why is it's like that tells you something. We'd much rather have some kind of cool story, some almost folklorish story about this guy than learn about like the nuances of like what actually happened in the founding of England. That's just how stuff works out, doesn't it? Though.
Historically speaking, our record gets a little clearer in the Christian monasteries of Northumbria, where the scholar Bede wrote the Ecclesiastical History of England, our best source for this period.
Wow, that's really funny how at the time I'm sure this guy like was doing this for a purpose to record history, but he would have no clue how important what he did deciding to live in this monastery and record English history. He thought, oh, this is just a good practice. Maybe it was part of the organization he was in, but it would become one of the most important things to ever happen to England in terms of reliably recalling its history. Just, he would have never known.
Northumbria, where the scholar Bede wrote the Ecclesiastical History of England, our best source for this period. And monasteries all across Northumbria were becoming magnificent palaces of literature and art throughout the 600s and 700s. Northumbria can have a little bit of a golden age, as a treat.
Okay.
The good news is that this was really shiny, but the bad news is that maybe this was a little bit too shiny, as the glittering attracted our old pals the Vikings, who rolled up to the island monastery of Lindisfarne to save the priceless relics from the totally unrelated fires that started burning right as the Vikings arrived.
The Vikings? I mean, where are Vikings from exactly? Vikings are very popular in not the Minnesota Vikings. That's funny. Oh, because I'm in America. Google is telling me about the football team. History, please. The Vikings of Europe, please. Google, settle down. Where are they from? Where are they from? Scandinavia. Like, the area of Europe, kind of east and southeast of England. If I'm not totally off, God, we're really asking a lot of me. I'm sorry. Scandinavia, hold on. Google can save me again. Why not? Region of Europe. Scandinavia is Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Where's England? Oh, there we go. Oh, man. I'm embarrassing myself here. So we have these guys to the east, sailing over to England. They are Vikings. Vikings. There are so many television shows in America about Vikings. We love Vikings because they're cool, not because we know anything about them, because I clearly don't. So that was actually interesting, getting to get a little context for all this. I'm learning.
To save the priceless relics from the totally unrelated fires that started burning right as the Vikings arrived. Weird. From there, the Vikings kept on coming, raiding all up and down the coasts and even heading inland with the Great Heathen Army. This was especially bad news for the King of Wessex, who was partway through conquering Mercia when the Scandinavians glomped their way down the eastern coast.
Oh, bad luck, huh? Just trying to conquer a whole nation for yourself, and then you got a bunch of Vikings breathing down the back of your neck. Unlucky.
They didn't have the means or the interest to form a single unified state, but the laws of these incoming Danes held sway over a pretty beefy stretch of land. So we call this thingy the Danelaw because when historians aren't creative, they're at least direct. Well, the Danelaw became a shiny mercantile midpoint between Ireland and Scandinavia. It was soon reverso-glomped by the Kingdom of Wessex. By 927, King Ethelstan had conquered all the way to Northumbria and began to style himself as King of England. So now
okay, we're starting to get to someone declaring themselves a king of England. So we're really getting to the breaking point here. The point where England can kind of be said to have existed under one ruler. I think that's what I'm gathering here.
Ethelstan had conquered.
What was his name?
Soon reverso-glomped by the Kingdom of Wessex. By 927, King Ethelstan had conquered all the way to
King Ethelstan? King Ethelstan? Okay.
Northumbria and began to style himself as King of England. So now, finally, we can actually discuss England as a single state. In the century following, Northumbria played hopscotch between English and Viking rule, and some wacky royal gymnastics.
Wow, I didn't know England had such a tie to Viking history. Not that I know anything about Viking history. God help me, I I do not, nor about really Roman history. I am vaguely aware of their historical significance, but I didn't know that they both had so much to do with the early creation of England. Uh, Very interesting.
Resulted in the Scandinavian Canute becoming king of England, Denmark, and Norway for 2 decades.
Oh, hold on. Someone conquered Scandinavia and England for a while?
Resulted in the hopscotch between English and Viking rule. And some wacky royal gymnastics resulted in the Scandinavian Canute becoming king of England, Denmark, and Norway for 2 decades.
Wow.
But despite the near constant tire fire of Scandinavian invasions and an extremely squiggly royal lineage, England had become impressively well run for the time, as the governing bureaucracy was organized and they knew how taxes worked.
Right, for how much madness seems to be going on here? And everyone trying to conquer England for themselves and royalty trying to sort it out. It's amazing to hear that they're actually like well run and well organized. That's pretty amazing.
Not bad. But, as will become a running theme in the next few centuries, there's no getting over that pesky question of royal succession. After the death of King Edward in 1066, the crown passed to Harold Godwinson. But
Okay. Is this all with the beginning of that first king they mentioned, who declared himself King of England? I forget his name already. Is that the first English king? And every other king or queen is descended from him? Is that a thing? Or I feel like I need to watch a video possibly on English royalty to understand the bloodlines, you know? I'm not sure if when we're talking about this other king now they're mentioning.
succession. After the death of King Edward in 1066, the crown passed to Harold Godwinson. But
Harold Godwinson, King Edward, I don't know if they're descendants of that original man who declared himself king. Be interesting to know, though.
2 other parties wanted that shiny headwear for themselves, namely King Harold Hardrada of Norway and Duke William of Normandy. Hardrada...
Oh, so everyone, gosh. So now you have other kings from other places still trying to lay claim to England, trying to make it part of Norway or Denmark. And wow, it's amazing that we ended up with England as we know it. My goodness, it could have just as easily, if history had changed, been a part of Scandinavia or something, right?
arrived to challenge Godwinson for the title of One True Herald, but was beaten at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. However, Godwinson's luck ran out 1 month later when...
お前はもう死んでいる。何?
And that's the Norman conquest in a nutshell. In contrast to the other assorted cases of England being conquered, this one had lasting significance.
England was semi-conquered, like, multiple times? My... See, America hasn't existed long enough for crazy stuff like that to have happened in our history. Our history's pretty simple, starting with the American Revolution. So I find the history of other nations totally more nuanced and interesting, and so you can go so far back. It's just a totally different thing. It's totally different. But that's what makes it so fascinating to learn about.
Firstly, William was set on keeping his hot new kingdom, so he invented this little doohickey called a castle and built them all over England to protect his armies from the odd revolt.
King William?
He invented this lasting significance. Firstly, William was set on...
King William. That sounds like an English monarch's name. King William. Actually, can I look that up? King William? There's probably multiple King Williams, right? King William. The son of lots of Georges. No. I'm trying to find out who's kind of considered the first king of England. That's what I'm getting at. But apparently this William built a bunch of castles, which is pretty cool.
On keeping his hot new kingdom, so he invented this little doohickey called a castle and built them all over England to protect his armies from the odd revolt. Meanwhile, he...
Now I get why England, the United Kingdom, has so many castles. They were trying to get taken over every other week, right? Everyone in the surrounding area wherever you go, everyone and their grandma was trying to take over England for themselves. So you need all these castles for strategic defense and like very real uses. That's amazing. That's actually amazing.
He replaced the English aristocracy with freshly imported Norman barons. Now, the Normans, being from France, were French, so they spoke
Hold on, we got French rulers? I can't gloss over this part.
armies from the Odd Revolt. Meanwhile, he replaced the English aristocracy with freshly imported Norman barons.
Why would he replace the English aristocracy currently in place with people from another nation, from France, to become part? Maybe they didn't think of it like that, like I am, because I think of England and France in the modern day as two very independent, separate entities. But maybe in this day and age, that's not how the thinking would have gone. Maybe I need to really free my mind, open my mind a little here, put myself in the position of someone living hundreds of years ago. Maybe you're letting in French monarchs to be part of your civilization for strategic purposes, to create relationships, maybe?
Now, the Normans, being from France, were French, so they spoke their native language instead of the local Old English. Over the
Yeah.
centuries, these two languages smushed into each other to create what we recognize as English.
Wow. And apparently, letting some very ancient French rulers into England happened to form English as we know it, and as I speak it. So, there's a fun fact. I'm having fun. Having fun.
Our beautiful disaster of a language. The last significant consequence was that William was still Duke of Normandy, and his supervisor, the King of France, was a
Wait, that's what it is. William is the Duke of Normandy, which is part of France. That's why he's letting in French royalty? Letting in French royalty to become part of the English royalty, if I'm understanding correctly?
little miffed that he went and yoinked himself a kingdom. And this diplomatic hiccup would embroil England and France in a casual 600-year-long rivalry. Now, this is normally the point where English history slavishly trails along the royal family tree through all its twists and turns, but this video is a summary, and I don't care about kings.
Oh, no, I'm not going to get my answer. No, please care about kings. Oh, okay, I see why this is kind of complicated. Once you start introducing French and English royalty and really getting into the details of who owned what, who was ruling over what at what time, and I guess the English have their own interpretation of who really ruled over England in their history. So maybe he'll go over that, maybe not, I don't know. Maybe it'll be a mystery forever.
Royal gymnastics are far too dull to be this needlessly confusing. I say this now so we can skip the faff later on. What matters to us here in the middle 1100s is that the royal family married across the Channel, so now the King of England became the Duke of Normandy, the Count of Anjou, and the Duke of Aquitaine. England has never been taller. This Angevin period rewrites Anglo-Frankish relations to the tune of "You got chocolate in my peanut butter."
you got England in my France. Delicious. Wow. Oh my goodness. This stuff is blowing my mind. Like, England was at one time this big and stretching into France because some people married each other. It's crazy.
Anywho, with this absurdly large tax base and access to half of France load of natural resources up and down the Atlantic coast, the Angevin Empire was an economic powerhouse. Of course, money means rich people, and rich people means armed robberies, so this period is the main historical setting for the legends of Robin Hood.
Oh, there's another thing. Robin Hood. All Americans know about Robin Hood. 100%. And King Arthur and Robin Hood, but they don't know about the deep history of England. What's up with that? Can someone explain that to me?
Closely associated with the reign of the crusading King Richard the Lionheart at the turn.
No, nothing against Robin Hood. He's pretty cool.
Turn of the 13th century. Speaking of military stuff, England took this opportunity to hop westward and glomp onto the Dublin-y part of Ireland. They tried for more, but they didn't really get much else.
So, is this where the UK starts to come in, where Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom? what he just spoke about here?
Westward and glomp onto the Dublin-y part of Ireland. They tried for more, but they didn't really get much else. Conquest is all well and good, but it's also expensive, and France was itching to get the rest of its France back, so the early 1200s saw Normandy, Anjou, and most of Aquitaine go poof. Meanwhile, the barons were fed up with the monarchy, that makes two of us, so they forced a few kings to sign a contract recognizing that teamwork makes the dream work. As in, the Magna Carta makes kings consult their barons, and this puts us on track to get Parliament a ways down the line.
You know, we did learn about the Magna Carta, so I should know more about the Magna Carta, but Magna Carta, we definitely were taught about it, but I just don't remember. Sorry, 5th grade teacher. I apologize if you're watching. Royal Charter of Rights, agreed to by, kind of like this man said in the video, the narrator, the barons made the kings sign it for more equal decision-making, we'll call it.
Carta makes kings consult their barons, and this puts us on track to get Parliament a ways down the line. Elsewhere in Britain, King Edward Longshanks conquered the Kingdom of Wales and glomped onto Scotland for a hot second, but they broke free.
Wait, so we just casually took over Wales and tried to take over Scotland and failed. Okay, just super quick, you know, no big deal.
The problem for England was that Scotland had allied with France, and by the mid-1300s, France was in a century-long win streak. King Edward III was a big fan of the part where England owned half of France, so he went for broke and claimed a right to the French kingship to justify a continental invasion. A bold strategy. It won't work. But it took a century for that to become apparent. From 1337 to 1453, England and France were locked in a 100 Years' War. Edward oversaw the first...
My God. Yeah, I really didn't know the deep history between England and France, and I probably would have appreciated it much better if I had a better visual. Now I will know from this day forward. I'm never going to forget that we got England and France, but honest to God, I don't think most Americans would be able to point out France to you on a map. I do believe they would be able to point out the British Isles, the British Islands, but I don't think they'd be able to. I might not be giving Americans enough credit, but I almost am going to say a lot of them wouldn't be able to point out England. They would just be able to point to the whole 2 islands and kind of say, oh, that's the UK. And they'd kind of be correct. And I bet a lot of them wouldn't get France if it was blank. So... that's my defense. That's my defense for myself, please.
First act, where the English poured across the Channel and thrashed the French army at the Battle of Crécy. To explain why, we've got to dig into the real juicy stuff. Economics.
Okay.
Right, look, I minored in econ. I have to at least pretend like this was worth something, okay? It all comes down to how they collected taxes. England had the sophistication to tax money and put it towards a professional army, while France took payment in goods and conscription, so their army was bigger, sure, but far weaker.
This is a major point of contention for why we're taught in America, why the American Revolution even happened, was over taxes between the individuals living in America and the British Empire. So, taxes again. Taxes. Everyone's fighting over taxes.
England's advance would have pressed on were it not for the surprise guest appearance of plague. Soon after the fighting resumed, the new French king, Charles V, had a much better time than his predecessor and pushed the English out to the edges of Gascony and Calais.
I was gonna say, at some point here, we gotta come up on a point where France and England were 2 distinct countries, right?
The third phase of the war is the spicy stuff that shows up in all those Shakespeare plays. We're talking Battle of Agincourt, Henry V, Hella Longbows, take that, Frenchies! After the loss, France fell into a civil war and almost collapsed until Joan Kick-Ass d'Arc arrived to absolutely steamroll the English.
We are taught about Joan of Arc. I vaguely remembered her being French.
King Henry VI had exactly 0 ways to handle this, so England got swept right on out of there. By 1453, all they had left was a tiny little sliver of Calais. Despite the war's overt goal of conquer France, it inadvertently cemented a distinct English identity through language, national heroes, and insular geography.
It's funny how that works. I've heard that about Canada as well, that war has a way in our histories of really forming our cultural identities, because it forces a nation to really face the worst of things, band together, work together, and really find out what your cultural national identity is going to be for survival and, to make progress. So it makes a lot of sense that war between England and France actually helped even more so set what would be kind of what England is.
The other major consequence was, big shock, another succession crisis. I've covered the War of the Roses before, and I respect you too much to bore you with this.
War of the Roses. So people are just always fighting over who's king and queen. That's something that just never stops, I bet.
All that matters is that a king died and two families spent a century stabbing each other over who would get the crown. Plot twist, both of them. Big ups to Henry VII for marrying the houses of York and Lancaster together to create the Tudor dynasty and resolve that mess for good.
The Tudor, these family names are honestly very, very, very vaguely familiar to me. And I might just be imagining that. But the word Tudor, as a family name, is somewhat familiar to me, kinda, maybe.
The Tudors managed to accomplish quite a bit in their century-long runtime. The first order of business for King Henry VIII was to formalize the rules for royal succession, presumably because he had to read about the War of the Roses and decided never again. But he also had outside problems, as King Charles of Spain and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, coincidentally the same Charlie, was getting a smidge overpowered since he put the Pope under house arrest. Further complicating matters was the little fact that Henry's first wife was also Charles's aunt, and she wasn't bearing any male heirs. Henry deftly solved the three problems of Charles, the Pope, and his wife in one move by going diet Protestant and forming his own church.
Wow. There's a lot going on here. And does Spain, we're talking about Spain getting more and more powerful. Is there ever a Spain-English conflict? This is already like a very eventful history. Can we? I'd be okay if nothing else happened, if it's just, and then we had England.
This new Church of England didn't really lean that hard into Protestant theology, but the real swerve was that the church answered only to the king. This quasi-reformist compromise wasn't exactly the easiest thing in the world to enforce, but the Tudors made it work. Meanwhile, back in geopolitics land, Henry made a new push into Ireland, and tried, and failed, to bully Scotland into uniting with England. In the second half of...
So that's why... now that I think about it, why would Scotland and England be separate? Because, from a foreigner's point of view, from an American's point of view, it's all one island. So actually learning this history clears that up. They tried. It was attempted, but it did not happen.
The century, Queen Elizabeth I held the fort against an increasingly aggressive Spain, way too hyped on conquistador cash to remember what hubris means. In 1588, Spain hucked an armada at England in the hopes of conquering it, but English cannons and English weather smashed the fleet to bits. When Elizabeth died without an heir...
There was a English-Spanish conflict, but the English kind of blew them up with cannons. That'll do it.
The crown passed to her nearest male relative, who happens to be King James VI of Scotland. So in 1603, James became King of Scotland and England. Everything after the union of the crowns is the Britain plotline, where they glomp all the isles, make an empire, all that rule Britannia jazz.
So, wow, that's significant. That's very significant. The crown passed to someone who was Scottish and English. So that's why we're getting the formation of a Great Britain, a British Empire. Wow. Wow. I need to hear that again.
The crown passed to her nearest male relative, who smashed the fleet to bits. When Elizabeth died without an heir, the crown passed to her nearest male relative, who happens to be King James VI of Scotland. So in 1603, James became King of Scotland and England.
400 years ago. Wow.
Everything
totally, just because she didn't have a male heir. The course of history changes again. That happens so often. The littlest things change the course of history. It's kind of cool.
After the Union of the Crowns is the Britain plotline, where they glomp all the Isles, make an empire, all that Rule Britannia jazz. So
Right.
this is where we'll wrap our history of England. And
Okay.
I'll be fully honest, sagas like this give history a bad rap. At a glance, it's a 1600-year-long nightmare that's stuffed with more monarchs than anybody should be forced to remember. And it's easy to get bogged down in any one episode or to lose track entirely.
It is easy to lose track, but I think it's all pretty fascinating. It's all rather amazing.
But the good news is that just because English historians are sadistically meticulous and blindingly self-obsessed doesn't mean that we have to be. Because if we zoom out a little bit and focus on England as a unit rather than a backdrop for royal gymnastics, the important kings will make sense in context and we avoid getting bogged down in the details.
Yeah, I do need like a really high level overview of the historical figures because I cannot keep up with all the different kings and queens by name because they're all Williams and Georges. So maybe that's an oversimplification, but that's what my simple American brain thinks. But the overall story here is a very good summary.
So then we can clearly see the macro plot progression from Roman province through the Heptarchy into the conflicts with France and
Yeah.
out towards the formation of Britain. So
Yeah.
let English history show why the big picture is often the clearest and also serve as an object lesson in the historiographic benefits of restraint.
You're right. Couldn't have said it better myself. Wow, that was a very nice video. Overly sarcastic productions. I like that name. And I liked that video. Very nice. That was good. That was a good... I don't want to act like it was like a movie or something, but my goodness, it feels like I just witnessed something. Like I just endured something. That's so much. Such a deep, rich history with... conflicts with many nations I had no idea had anything to do with England or its formation, or the fact that, the control over England went through so many hands and disputes, and it's fascinating. I'm sure if you were alive experiencing it, it wasn't as fun as being a guy on the internet getting to watch it on a video for 10 minutes. But I do thank them for experiencing that so I could experience this, because this is very, very enlightening. I'm very glad that I learned all this. Now I feel silly having not known it, but better late than never, right? Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this reaction, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting, learning about English, British, UK, culture and history, geography, things, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.